Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story. The imposing glass tower of Nakamura Enterprises pierced the Manhattan skyline like a crystal dagger against the February dawn. Amara stood at its base, her reflection fragmenting across the mirrored entrance as snowflakes melted in her dark curls. Her fingers tightened around the cream envelope that had arrived 3 days ago, its contents still seeming more fantasy than reality. The security guard's eyes lingered a moment too long on her worn wool coat as she presented her visitor's pass. She lifted her chin slightly, a gesture learned from years of proving herself in spaces that weren't designed to welcome her. At 32, she had developed an armor of quiet dignity that served her well in a world that often judged her by the rich melanin of her skin rather than the wealth of her character. Floor 87, the guard instructed, his tone softening as he noticed the hospital ID card peeking from her purse. Executive elevator to the right. The elevator was a glass capsule that offered dizzying views of the city as it ascended. Amara's stomach lurched, though whether from the height or her nerves, she couldn't tell. Her mind drifted to the hospital room she'd left just hours ago, where her father lay connected to machines that kept him alive at the cost of destroying their family's finances. The thought steeled her resolve. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The letter had been precise in its impossible offer. Your presence is requested for a business proposition that could resolve your current financial obligations. The signature beneath had belonged to Julian himself, the paralyzed CEO whose name graced medical wings and research centers across the city. She'd seen him once from afar during a hospital board meeting, a striking figure, even in his wheelchair, with prematurely silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the weight of empires. The elevator chimed at the 87th floor, opening into a space that felt more like an art gallery than an office. The walls were adorned with massive abstract canvases, their swirling colors reflecting off the polished marble floors. A sleek desk stretched before floor-to-ceiling windows, behind which sat a woman whose age was as carefully curated as her appearance. Miss Amara, the woman rose, her voice carrying the crisp edges of old money. I'm Eleanor Hawthorne, Mr. Nakamura's personal assistant. Please follow me. They walked down a corridor lined with photographs not of business deals or corporate achievements, but of hospitals, research facilities, and smiling children who'd benefited from Nakamura Enterprises' medical philanthropy. Amara recognized several of her own patients in the images, their brave smiles captured during their darkest battles. Eleanor paused before a set of ebony doors. Mr. Nakamura has reviewed your file extensively, she said, turning to study Amara with an unreadable expression. Your work in pediatric oncology has not gone unnoticed, nor has your father's situation. She hesitated, something almost like sympathy crossing her features. Whatever happens in the next hour, remember that you have a choice. Before Amara could question this cryptic advice, the doors swung open. The office beyond was a testament to minimalist luxury, all clean lines and muted grays, with a wall of windows offering a god's-eye view of Central Park below. Snow was falling harder now, turning the city into a monochrome painting, and there he was. Julian sat in his wheelchair, backlit by the winter morning, his presence somehow filling the vast space despite his seated position. He was older than she expected, perhaps in his mid-40s, with aristocratic features that spoke of old European bloodlines. The paralysis that had dominated recent headlines about him did nothing to diminish the aura of power that seemed to emanate from his very being. Miss Amara, his voice was deep, with an accent she couldn't quite place. Thank you for coming. He gestured to a leather chair positioned before his desk. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Amara moved forward on legs that felt increasingly unsteady. Up close, she could see the subtle signs of his condition, the careful positioning of his legs, the slight tension in his shoulders as he maintained his posture. But it was his eyes that caught and held her attention, steel gray and startlingly intense, studying her with an intelligence that felt almost tangible. I'll be direct, he continued, withdrawing a folder from his desk. Inside this folder is a contract. Should you choose to sign it, you would agree to marry me for the duration of 1 year. In return, you would receive $1 billion upon the completion of that year. He paused, watching her reaction. No strings attached, no hidden clauses, a simple exchange of time for financial security. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Amara gripped the arms of her chair, her mind racing to process his words. Marriage? To one of the most powerful men in New York? It seemed absurd, impossible. And yet, why me? She managed to ask, proud that her voice remained steady. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. An excellent question. One of many that demonstrates why you're sitting in that chair, instead of the dozens of other candidates we considered. He wheeled himself around the desk, stopping beside her. You've spent the last 5 years working in pediatric oncology, despite offers from private practices that would have tripled your salary. You've taken extra shifts to help pay for your father's medical care, yet still find time to volunteer at the free clinic in Brooklyn. Your patients' parents speak of your compassion. Your colleagues praise your dedication. And your financial records show someone who has never taken the easy path for personal gain. He turned to face the windows, his profile sharp against the falling snow. I need a wife who understands the value of both money and integrity. Miss Amara, someone who won't be seduced by wealth alone, but who understands its power to affect change. The $1 billion isn't just a payment, it's a test of character. Amara's mind flew to her father's hospital room, to the mounting bills and the treatments he desperately needed. With that kind of money, she could save him, could fund research to help other families avoid the same struggle. But marriage to a man she didn't know, didn't love? What would be expected of me? She asked, her practical nature asserting itself through the shock. Discretion, companionship, attendance at necessary social functions, maintenance of a public image suitable for someone in my position. He turned back to her, his expression softening slightly. I am not looking for love, Miss Amara, nor anything beyond what would be appropriate between business partners who share a common goal. A weighted silence filled the room as snow continued to fall outside, turning the world white and clean and new. Amara thought of her mother, who had taught her that dignity was worth more than gold, but she also thought of her father's smile, of the children in her ward who needed advocates with resources, of all the good that could be done with the kind of money being offered. How long do I have to decide? She asked finally. 24 hours, he replied. The contract is there for your review, including all terms and conditions. My lawyers are available to answer any questions. He wheeled himself back behind his desk. But know this, Miss Amara, whatever you decide, your father's medical bills will be taken care of. Consider it compensation for your time today. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she blinked them back. This man was offering her a solution wrapped in a puzzle, charity disguised as opportunity. The question was, could she accept it? And more importantly, what would it cost her beyond the year he was asking for? Rising from her chair, Amara picked up the contract folder. Thank you, Mr. Nakamura. I'll have my answer for you tomorrow. He nodded, that same ghost of a smile touching his lips. Until tomorrow, then, Miss Amara. As she walked back to the elevator, contract clutched to her chest, Amara felt the weight of the decision before her. She had 24 hours to choose between her pride and her purpose, between her principles and the practical needs of those she loved. The elevator descended, and with it came the realization that, regardless of her choice, her life would never be the same after today. Little did she know, as she stepped out into the swirling snow, that Julian was watching her departure on his security monitors, his expression thoughtful. He had told her this was a business arrangement, a simple exchange of time for money. What he hadn't told her was how long he'd been watching her work at the hospital, how her dedication had caught his attention months before his paralysis, or how this carefully orchestrated meeting was anything but random. The snow continued to fall, erasing footprints and blurring boundaries, as two lives poised on the edge of an extraordinary journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about love, trust, and the true value of a human heart. Chapter 2. First Encounter. The 24 hours Amara had been given to make her decision passed like a fevered dream. She'd spent the night pacing her modest Brooklyn apartment, the contract's pages spread across her kitchen table like tarot cards promising a future she couldn't quite believe. Dawn found her at her father's bedside in Mount Sinai Hospital, watching his chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. "Baby girl," he whispered, his voice rough from the ventilator. "You look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." Amara squeezed his hand, feeling the fragility of his bones beneath paper-thin skin. "I'm fine, Daddy. Just thinking about some changes at work." The lie tasted bitter, but she couldn't burden him with this impossible choice. A nurse entered to check his vitals, and Amara recognized the worried glance at the monitors. His numbers were dropping again. Another surgery would be needed soon, surgery they couldn't afford. The decision crystallized in her mind like frost on glass. An hour later, she stood again in Julian's office, this time dressed in her best navy suit, her hair swept up in a professional twist. The morning sun painted the Manhattan skyline in shades of gold, but the office felt colder than before, more austere, in the harsh light of day. Julian was positioned behind his desk, his wheelchair now an extension of his commanding presence rather than a limitation. Today he wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her yearly salary, his silver hair catching the light like polished sterling. "You've made your decision," he stated rather than asked, those penetrating gray eyes reading her like a familiar text. Amara placed the signed contract on his desk. "I have conditions of my own." A flicker of something surprise, respect crossed his features. "Please continue." "I keep my job at the hospital," she began, standing straight before him. "My patients need me, and I won't abandon them for social functions or corporate events. I'll attend what's necessary, but my work comes first." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Reasonable, continue. I want my father transferred to your private medical facility in Manhattan. The best care, the best doctors." Her voice wavered slightly, but held firm. "And I want access to your research division's resources for my pediatric cancer patients." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're negotiating for others rather than yourself. Interesting." He wheeled himself around the desk, closing the distance between them. "What do you want for yourself, Amara?" The use of her first name startled her, but she held her ground. "Respect," she answered simply. "I won't be a trophy or a scandal. If we're to convince the world this is real, you'll treat me as an equal partner, not a purchased companion." Julian's laugh was unexpected, rich and genuine, with none of the corporate polish she'd heard before. "Oh, you are far more fascinating than your file suggested." He extended his hand. "Deal." When she took it, his grip was warm and strong, sending an unexpected current up her arm. For a moment, their eyes locked, and Amara saw something shift in those gray depths of vulnerability quickly masked by his usual composure. "Eleanor will help you with the arrangements," he continued, releasing her hand. "We'll need to move quickly. The press will catch wind of this soon, and I prefer to control the narrative." He pressed a button on his desk, and Eleanor materialized like a well-dressed ghost. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Lawyers appeared with more documents. Designers arrived with fabric swatches and wedding plans. And security experts briefed her on protocols she'd need to follow as Mrs. Nakamura. Through it all, Amara observed Julian from the corner of her eye, noting how he managed everything from his wheelchair with subtle gestures and quiet commands. Later that afternoon found them alone again, the sun setting behind the city's spires. Amara's head was spinning with information, but one question remained unanswered. "Why the rush?" she asked finally. "Why not take time to make it more convincing?" Julian wheeled to the windows, his profile sharp against the darkening sky. "Because, my dear future wife, time is the one luxury I may not have much of." He turned to face her, and for the first time, she saw the toll his condition took on him, the slight tremor in his hands, the tightness around his eyes. "The paralysis is progressive. The doctors are uncertain about the prognosis." The nurse in Amara wanted to ask more, to understand the medical details, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This wasn't about his condition. This was about legacy, about ensuring his empire would be protected by someone he deemed worthy. "I'll need to pack my things," she said instead, offering him the dignity of his privacy. "Already taken care of. Your new wardrobe and everything you'll need is being delivered to the penthouse." He smiled at her startled expression. "Did you think you'd be living anywhere else?" "We must maintain appearances, after all." A sleek black car waited for her outside, ready to whisk her to her new life. As she settled into the leather seats, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. "Welcome to the family. Mrs. Nakamura to be. You've just made the second best decision of your life." As she stared at the message, puzzled, another text followed. "The best decision will be when you choose to stay after the year is up." Looking up at the towering building she'd just left, Amara caught a glimpse of a figure in the top floor window, a silhouette in a wheelchair, watching her departure. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying her toward a future that felt both terrifying and thrilling. What she couldn't see was Julian's expression as he watched her go, or the way his hand trembled slightly as he set down his phone. On his desk lay a medical file, not hers, but his own. The prognosis was indeed uncertain, but not in the way he'd implied. The experimental treatment he'd been refusing had a high success rate, but he needed something more than medicine to heal. He needed truth in a world of lies, compassion in a realm of calculations. He needed her, though he wouldn't admit it yet, even to himself. As night fell over Manhattan, two people lay awake in different parts of the city, one in a luxury penthouse, preparing for her new role, the other in a wheelchair in a high tower, both wondering if they'd just made the biggest mistake or the best decision of their lives. The chess pieces were set, the game begun, but neither player fully understood the rules, and the stakes were far higher than mere billions. For in the space between truth and deception, between duty and desire, something unexpected was taking root, something that no contract could bind and no fortune could buy. Chapter 3. Hidden Motives. The morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows of Julian's private study, illuminating walls lined with surveillance photos, medical reports, and carefully annotated newspaper clippings. All of them featured Amara. 6 months of surveillance condensed into a paper trail of a life observed from afar. Eleanor stood beside his wheelchair, her usual professional demeanor tinged with concern as she watched her employer study the wall of information. "Sir, she's going to discover this eventually." Julian wheeled closer to a particular photograph, Amara kneeling beside a young cancer patient's bed, her face lit with genuine compassion as she read from a storybook. "That was the moment, Eleanor," he said softly, touching the image. 8 months ago, during my quarterly hospital inspection. Everyone else was focused on impressing the CEO, showing me charts and statistics, but she didn't even notice me. She was too busy making that little girl laugh. The memory played vividly in his mind. He had been walking then, striding through hospital corridors with his usual entourage of administrators and assistants. The sound of laughter had drawn him to the pediatric oncology ward, where he'd witnessed something that would change the course of his life. "Tell me about that day again," Eleanor requested, though she'd heard the story many times before. Julian's eyes took on a distant look. The girl was terrified of her upcoming surgery. None of the doctors could calm her. Then Amara came in, still wearing her scrubs from a double shift. She sat down, pulled out the Little Prince, and started reading. But she didn't just read, she created different voices for each character, made sound effects, turned a simple story into a magical performance. He wheeled to his desk, picking up a medical file, his own this time. The girl forgot her fear. "I forgot mine too for a moment. Do you know what that's worth, Eleanor? To find someone who can make you forget your fears." "But the paralysis deception," Eleanor began, her voice trailing off diplomatically, "is necessary," he finished firmly. "How else could I be sure? Every woman who's shown interest in me since I took over Nakamura Enterprises has wanted something: money, power, status. I needed to know if Amara was different." Eleanor moved to the windows, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. "And your actual condition? The tremors, the weakness?" "Treatable," he admitted, setting down the file. "The experimental procedure has an 85% success rate, but I needed a reason to approach her, to create this situation. The paralysis provides perfect cover." "It's a dangerous game you're playing," Eleanor warned. "She's not like the social climbers and gold diggers you're used to dealing with." "When she discovers the truth, she'll hate me," Julian finished, his voice carrying a note of resignation. "But by then, maybe she'll understand why I did it. Maybe she'll have seen enough of my world to know why I needed to be sure." He wheeled to another section of the wall, where newspaper clippings detailed Amara's volunteer work at free clinics, her advocacy for underprivileged patients, her perfect academic record achieved while working multiple jobs. "Look at her life, Eleanor. Every choice she's made has been about helping others, often at great personal cost. In a world where everyone wants something from me, she spent her life giving to others." Eleanor studied her employer's face, noting the softness that entered his expression when he spoke of Amara. In 15 years as his assistant, she'd never seen him like this. "You're already falling for her," she observed quietly. Julian didn't deny it. Instead, he moved to his computer, pulling up the security feed from Amara's new penthouse apartment. She was there now, arranging her few personal belongings among the luxury items that had been provided for her. Even through the grainy footage, her discomfort with the opulence was evident. "Watch," he instructed Eleanor. On screen, Amara discovered the library that had been stocked for her medical texts, research journals, and a complete collection of children's literature for her patient readings. Her face lit up with genuine joy, and she immediately began organizing the books with professional precision. She hasn't even looked at the jewelry vault, Eleanor noted, impressed despite herself. Most women would have gone there first. No, Julian agreed, a small smile playing at his lips. She hasn't. But she spent an hour this morning on the phone with her hospital supervisor, arranging her new schedule to ensure her patients wouldn't be affected by the marriage. He pulled up another file on his computer, the latest results from his medical tests. The tremors were getting worse, the weakness in his legs more pronounced. The doctors were pushing for him to start treatment soon, but he needed time to understand the woman he'd chosen, time to see if his instincts about her were right. "Sir," Eleanor said hesitantly, "what if she surprises you? What if she's exactly who she appears to be?" Julian's hand trembled slightly as he closed the medical file. "Then I'll have found something worth more than all of Nakamura Enterprises." He turned to face his assistant, his expression serious. "But I need to know for certain. $1 billion has a way of revealing people's true nature." On his desk, a small monitor showed another feed Amara's father in his new private hospital room, receiving the best care money could buy. She had visited him that morning, her eyes shining with tears of relief as the doctors explained the advanced treatments now available to him. She could have asked for anything, Julian mused. A bigger payment, a shorter contract term, personal luxuries. Instead, she negotiated for her father's care and her patients' access to our research facilities. He shook his head in wonder. "Do you know how rare that is, Eleanor? To find someone whose first thought is for others?" Eleanor gathered some papers from his desk, preparing to leave. "Just remember, sir, trust goes both ways. The truth has a way of coming out. And when it does, I know," he interrupted softly. "But by then, I hope to have earned something more valuable than her trust. I hope to have earned her understanding." As Eleanor left, Julian wheeled back to the wall of photos, his eyes drawn to a recent addition, Amara in her navy suit, signing the contract at his desk. The sunlight had caught her profile, highlighting the strength in her jaw, the determination in her eyes. She looked like a woman making a sacrifice, not someone seizing an opportunity. He touched the photo gently. "Forgive me," he whispered to the image, "but I had to know." In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a message from the hospital board. They wanted an answer about the experimental treatment. He ignored it, instead pulling up the surveillance feed from Amara's apartment again. She was in the library, curled in a window seat with a medical journal, making notes as she read. Even in this gilded cage he'd created, she remained focused on her mission to heal, to help, to make a difference. The irony wasn't lost on him. In his elaborate plan to test her character, she was unknowingly testing his. Every selfless action, every choice that put others first, every moment of genuine compassion chipped away at the protective walls he'd built around his heart. As evening fell over Manhattan, Julian sat in his wheelchair, surrounded by the evidence of his deception, and wondered if, in trying to protect himself from being used, he had become the very thing he despised, someone who used others for their own ends, no matter how noble the intention. But it was too late to turn back now. The wheels were in motion, the story already unfolding. All he could do was hope that when the truth finally emerged, she would understand that sometimes the greatest lies are told not to deceive, but to discover something true and precious in a world of facades and false promises. Chapter 4. Reluctant Partners. The Cathedral of St. Patrick stood majestic against the winter sky, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayers cast in stone. Inside, beneath soaring vaults and stained glass windows, Amara was becoming Miss S. Nakamura in a ceremony that was both intimate and scrutinized by the world. She wore a gown of ivory silk that whispered against the marble floor, designed to make headlines while maintaining the dignity she insisted upon. Her father, stronger now thanks to his new treatments, sat in the front row, tears gleaming in his eyes. The guest list was small, but powerful CEOs, politicians, and philanthropists who controlled much of Manhattan's destiny from their corner offices and private clubs. Julian waited at the altar in his wheelchair, his silver hair catching the light from the ancient windows, creating a halo effect that made him appear almost otherworldly. His gray eyes never left her face as she walked down the aisle, and for a moment, the intensity of his gaze made her forget this was all an arrangement. The ceremony was brief, traditional, and perfectly orchestrated. When Amara said, "I do," Her voice carried the strength that had drawn Julian to her in the first place. When he slipped the ring onto her finger, a stunning but understated diamond that she had chosen over more ostentatious options, his hand trembled slightly, though only Eleanor, watching closely from the front row, seemed to notice. It was what came after that tested them both. The media explosion was immediate and brutal. Headlines screamed across every platform: paralyzed billionaire weds black nurse, love or manipulation. Nakamura Enterprises, amasses hospital employee, inside the unlikely union, from bedside to billions. The Amara story. Amara faced it all with remarkable composure, though Julian noticed how she squared her shoulders each morning before facing the world, as if donning invisible armor. Their first public appearance as husband and wife was at the Nakamura Enterprises annual charity gala. Amara had spent the day at the hospital, refusing to abandon her shifts despite her new status. She arrived at the Plaza Hotel still wearing her practical watch, a small act of defiance against the diamonds and designer labels that surrounded her. "There, watch," Julian murmured as she took her place beside his wheelchair, his hand finding hers with practiced ease. "Show them who you are." And she did. When asked about her background, Amara spoke passionately about healthcare inequality and her vision for more accessible medical care. When questioned about her marriage, she met the insinuations with quiet dignity. "My husband and I share a commitment to improving lives through medical innovation," she would say, her hand resting naturally on Julian's shoulder. "The rest is our business." But it was during an unexpected moment that she truly began to understand the world she'd entered. A prominent socialite, dripping in jewelry and malice, approached them during dinner. "Oh, how charitable of you, Julian," the woman drawled, her eyes sliding dismissively over Amara. "Though I must say, there were several more suitable candidates from proper families who would have been happy to take on your condition." Before Julian could respond, Amara spoke, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she used with frightened patience. "I apologize, but I don't believe we've met. I'm Dr. Amara Nakamura. I noticed your slight tremor when you lifted your champagne glass classic sign of essential tremor. If you'd like, I can recommend an excellent neurologist who's doing groundbreaking work in that area." The socialite blanched, quickly excusing herself. Julian's laugh was genuine and warm. "Remind me never to underestimate you," he said, real admiration in his eyes. Later that night, in the privacy of their penthouse, Amara kicked off her heels with a sigh of relief. They had separate bedrooms, part of their arrangement, but shared the massive living space with its wall of windows overlooking Central Park. "You handled yourself beautifully tonight," Julian said, wheeling himself to the wet bar and pouring them both a drink with practiced ease. "Though I suspect you enjoyed that diagnosis a bit too much." Amara accepted the glass, sinking into a leather armchair. "I'm a doctor. I use the tools I have." She studied him over the rim of her glass. "Just like you use yours." His eyebrow raised slightly. "I saw how you manipulated that senator's guilt over his healthcare voting record into a major donation for the children's wing." A small smile played at her lips. "We're not so different, you and I. We both know how to work within our systems to get what we need." Something flickered in Julian's eyes, pride, concern, but it was gone too quickly to read. "And what is it you need, Amara?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. She took another sip of her drink, buying time to choose her words carefully. "Right now, to understand my place in all of this, the media circus, the social politics, the constant scrutiny. It's a different kind of hospital ward, with different kinds of diseases to treat." Julian wheeled closer, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne and see the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of private worries. "And what's your diagnosis, doctor?" "Terminal cases of ego, chronic wealth addiction, acute status anxiety," she listed, making him laugh again. Then, more seriously, and occasional rare instances of genuine desire to make a difference. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the pretense fell away. They were just two people sharing a quiet moment above a glittering city, each carrying secrets and hopes the other couldn't fully see. The moment broke when Julian's hand trembled, causing him to nearly drop his glass. Amara's medical instincts kicked in, and she reached for him automatically. "Are you fine?" He cut her off, wheeling back slightly. "Just tired. It's been a long day." She watched him retreat to his bedroom, noting the tension in his shoulders, the careful way he controlled his movements. Her medical training told her there was more to his condition than he was sharing, But their arrangement didn't give her the right to push. Alone in her own room later, Amara stood at the window, watching the city lights blur through her reflection. On her finger, the wedding ring caught the light, throwing tiny rainbows on the wall. 6 weeks into their marriage, and she was starting to realize that the $1 billion might be the simplest part of their arrangement. In his own room, Julian sat in the darkness, watching the surveillance feed that showed Amara at her window. His hand shook as he reached for his private phone, pulling up the message from his doctors again. The experimental treatment window was closing. Soon, he would have to make a choice: continue the charade and risk permanent damage, or tell her the truth and risk losing whatever was slowly building between them. The city hummed below, indifferent to their private dramas. In separate rooms, two people who had entered into a business arrangement lay awake, each guarding secrets that threatened to change everything, each beginning to realize that the greatest risk in their careful plan might not be discovery by the press or society's judgment, but the unpredictable, uncontrollable power of genuine connection. Tomorrow would bring more appearances, more scrutiny, more careful navigation of their public roles. But tonight, in the quiet hours when pretense fell away, both Amara and Julian faced the same unsettling question: what happens when a marriage of convenience becomes inconveniently real? Chapter 5. Unexpected Feelings. The medical library at Nakamura Enterprises Research Facility had become Amara's sanctuary during the long nights when sleep eluded her. 3 months into their marriage, she sat surrounded by stacks of medical journals, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, reading glasses perched on her nose, as she pored over the latest research on spinal cord injuries and neurodegenerative conditions. The cleaning staff had long since learned to work around her, though they whispered among themselves about the CEO's wife who spent her nights studying medical texts instead of attending society parties. Tonight, she barely noticed when the security guard brought her another cup of coffee, her third since midnight. "There has to be something here," she muttered, making another note in her already full notebook. The page was covered with diagrams and citations, all focused on one goal: understanding Julian's condition. Something wasn't adding up. As a medical professional, she'd seen enough cases of paralysis to know that his symptoms didn't follow the typical pattern. The tremors in his hands, the way he sometimes seemed to fight against movement rather than lack it entirely, the occasional moments when he forgot his limitations, all of it suggested a different diagnosis than what she'd been told. A soft whirring sound made her look up. Julian sat in his wheelchair at the library entrance, watching her with an unreadable expression. "It's 3:00 a.m., he said quietly. "You should be sleeping." Amara pushed her glasses up, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "I could say the same to you." He wheeled closer, glancing at her notes. His face tightened almost imperceptibly. "You've been researching my condition." "I'm a doctor," she reminded him. "It's what I do." "And what have you found?" His voice was carefully neutral, but she caught the slight tension in his shoulders. Amara looked at him directly, her professional training warring with her growing personal investment. "Inconsistencies. Your symptoms don't match standard progressive paralysis. The tremors suggest neurological involvement, but your muscle response patterns indicate—" "Stop." The word was soft, but firm. "This isn't why I married you." "No," she agreed, closing her notebook. "You married me because you needed someone who could handle your world without being seduced by it. But you forgot something important in your calculations." "And what's that?" "I'm a healer. It's not what I do. It's who I am. I can't turn it off just because we have a contract." The silence between them crackled with unspoken tensions. Julian wheeled to the window, his profile sharp against the pre-dawn sky. "Tell, system, me about your day," he said suddenly, changing the subject. Amara allowed the deflection, understanding that some walls couldn't be breached head-on. "I had a new patient today, a 7-year-old girl. Stage 3 neuroblastoma. She's scared of hospitals, but not of death. She told me she's more worried about her little brother being alone than about her own treatment." "What's her prognosis?" "Better than it would have been, thanks to the access you've given us to the experimental treatments." She stood, moving to stand beside his wheelchair. "That's what I don't understand. You've dedicated billions to medical research, to helping others heal, but you won't—" "It's late," he interrupted, but his voice was gentle. "You have early rounds tomorrow." "Today, actually," she corrected, glancing at her watch. "But I've been meaning to ask you. There's a fundraising dinner next week for the pediatric oncology department." Would you come not as a donor or CEO, but as my husband? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond a simple social engagement. Since their marriage, they'd appeared together at countless events, but always as part of their carefully choreographed public performance. This was different. This was her world, her passion. Julian was quiet for a long moment. Will there be children present? Some of our recovered patients, yes. They love sharing their success stories. His hands tightened on his wheelchair's arms. I don't do well with children. They ask too many honest questions. Amara knelt beside his chair, entering his line of sight. That's exactly why I want you there. Children see truth that adults have learned to ignore, and lately, I feel like I'm drowning in carefully constructed facades. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the space between them. Julian reached out, almost unconsciously, and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was startlingly intimate, and both of them froze for a moment. I'll come, he said finally. But I have conditions of my own. Of course you do, she smiled. You're a businessman. No press, no photographers, no grand speeches about corporate philanthropy. His voice softened. Just us, supporting your work. Amara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Deal. The moment was interrupted by his phone, buzzing a message from his medical team, she guessed, noting how quickly he moved to silence it. Another piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. You should get some sleep, he said, wheeling toward the door. Eleanor will have my head if you fall asleep during tomorrow's board meeting. Julian, she called after him. He paused but didn't turn. Whatever you're not telling me, whatever you're afraid of, I want to know that I'm here not because of the contract, not because of the money, but because I've watched you spend these months helping others while refusing help yourself, and it matters to me. His shoulders tensed, and for a moment she thought he might finally open up. Instead, he said quietly, "Good night, Amara," and disappeared into the darkness of the hallway. Alone again, Amara returned to her medical texts, but her mind kept drifting to the feeling of his fingers brushing her hair, the vulnerability she'd glimpsed in his eyes. When had this happened? When had her clinical interest in his condition evolved into something that made her heart race at his proximity? In his private office, Julian watched her on the security feed, his trembling hands holding another message from his doctor. The treatment window was closing fast. Soon, the damage would be irreversible. But telling her the truth now, when she was looking at him with such genuine concern, such growing affection, he opened his desk drawer, pulling out a photo taken at last week's charity event. Amara was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting naturally on his shoulder, her face lit with an emotion that no contract could mandate. He traced her smile with a finger, remembering how it felt to make her laugh, to see her brilliant mind at work, to watch her move through his world while remaining utterly, authentically herself. The $1 billion had been meant to test her character, but somewhere along the way, she had begun testing his. Every late-night research session, every genuine attempt to help him heal, every moment of honest connection chipped away at the walls he'd built around his heart. Dawn was breaking over Manhattan when Amara finally left the library, her notebook filled with new theories and questions. As she passed Julian's office, she saw light under the door but didn't knock. Some distances couldn't be crossed until both parties were ready to meet in the middle. What she didn't know was that on the other side of that door, Julian was making a decision that would change everything. Because sometimes, the hardest truths to face aren't the ones we keep from others, but the ones we hide from ourselves. And the truth he could no longer deny was this: somewhere between the contracts and conditions, between his tests and her healing nature, between his fears and her unwavering strength, he had committed the one error he'd sworn to avoid. He had fallen in love with his wife. Chapter 6, The Betrayal. The pediatric oncology fundraiser had transformed the hospital's rooftop garden into an enchanted wonderland. Fairy lights twinkled against the Manhattan skyline, while young patients, temporarily free from their hospital beds, danced and played among the flowers. At the center of it all, Amara watched Lila demonstrate her improving strength by attempting a small ballet twirl. "Careful, sweetheart," Amara cautioned, her doctor's instincts ever present. But her eyes kept drifting to Julian. In his wheelchair, surrounded by admiring parents, he was announcing a new research grant, his voice carrying that perfect mix of corporate authority and personal warmth she'd grown to love. Love. The realization still startled her sometimes. "Doctor." "Nakamura," Lila called out, breaking into her thoughts. Look what Mr. Nakamura gave me. She proudly displayed a delicate silver bracelet with a unicorn charm. He said it's for being brave during treatments. Amara smiled, though something nagged at the edge of her consciousness. The way Julian had wheeled himself through the garden paths seemed different tonight, more controlled than usual. She shook off the thought, attributing it to her constant medical analysis of his condition. Later that evening, she sat in the hospital's medical library, surrounded by research papers and case studies. 6 months of intensive study into progressive paralysis conditions, and something still wasn't adding up. The tremors in his hands followed a pattern she'd seen before, but not in paralysis cases. Still working? Eleanor's voice startled her. It's nearly midnight. Amara gestured to her notes. Something about these neurological patterns they're more consistent with. She stopped, noticing Eleanor's unusual tension. What is it? He wouldn't want me to tell you this, Eleanor said carefully. But there's a new experimental treatment, one he's been refusing. Amara straightened. Why hasn't anyone told me? I'm his wife, his medical proxy. Are you? Eleanor's question hung in the air like smoke. Are you really his wife, Amara? Or are you the latest subject in an experiment? The words hit her like physical blows. What are you talking about? Eleanor placed a thick file on the desk. Because I respect what you've brought to his life. I'm giving you a chance to discover the truth yourself. After that, what you do with it is your choice. Alone again, Amara opened the file with trembling hands. Inside were surveillance photos, spanning years her working at the hospital, her volunteering at free clinics, her reading to patients, and dated notes in Julian's distinctive handwriting. Subject demonstrates exceptional ethical standards under financial pressure. Continues to prioritize patient care over personal gain. Potential candidate for character assessment project. The world tilted on its axis as years of observation, months of marriage, began to realign themselves into a horrifying new pattern. But it was the medical reports that finally shattered her reality, detailed neurological assessments showing a treatable condition, not the progressive paralysis she'd been told about. The wheelchair had been a prop, a test, a way to observe her reactions. She didn't remember leaving the library, didn't remember the elevator ride to the penthouse, but she would never forget the moment she burst into their home and found him standing by the windows. Amara. He turned, shock registering on his face, then resignation as he saw the file in her hands. I can explain. Explain? Her voice was eerily calm. Explain how you watched me spend nights researching treatments. How you let me worry, let me care, let me fall in love with a lie. She moved to their bedroom, yanking open drawers where she kept her medical journal, 6 months of notes, theories, treatment plans, all based on a deception. Do you know how many specialists I consulted? Papers flew as she pulled out folders. How many nights I spent analyzing your symptoms, trying to find something, anything, to help you? A bitter laugh escaped her. And the whole time, you were what? Taking notes on my reactions? Scoring my performance in your twisted social experiment. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? She whirled to face him. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the great Julian Nakamura needed to make sure his billion-dollar investment wouldn't go to waste on someone who might actually care about him instead of his money. I needed to know if you were real. His shout surprised them both. In my world, everyone wants something. Every smile hides an agenda. Every kind word comes with a price tag. So you created this elaborate scheme, this performance of vulnerability, to test my character. She gestured to the wheelchair, sitting unused in the corner. Did you enjoy watching me worry about you? Did you take notes on how many hours I spent in the library? Did you record my reactions when I thought your condition was getting worse? Her voice broke on the last word, and suddenly she was sobbing deep, wrenching cries that came from a place of absolute betrayal. He moved to comfort her, but she backed away. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me with hands that could work all along, while I stayed awake nights, trying to understand why they were shaking. Lila's bracelet caught the light on her desk, and fresh pain bloomed. The children, she whispered. You let them believe. Let them see you as someone sharing their struggles. They help me understand. Understand what? How to manipulate people's empathy. How to turn genuine concern into data points for your character study. She moved to the windows, wrapping her arms around herself. Behind her, she heard him take a step forward, then stop. The tremors are real, he said quietly. The neurological condition. The need for treatment, that's all true. But treatable. She turned back to him, fury replacing tears. All this time there was a treatment available, and you chose to refuse it. Do you know what that does to me as a doctor? To know you willingly let a condition worsen, while I searched desperately for ways to help you? She walked to their wedding photo on the mantel. They looked so happy, so real. Was any of it true? Any single moment? My feelings for you are, what? Data in an experiment? Results in your study of human nature? She set the photo face down. I'm a doctor, Julian. I took an oath to do no harm. But right now, looking at you standing there, all I want to do is hurt you as deeply as you've hurt me. Moving to the credenza, she withdrew their marriage contract. Consider it void. You entered into it under false pretenses. She tore it in half, the sound sharp in the silent room. Keep your $1 billion. I'd rather be poor than be your lab rat for another moment. Amara, please, don't follow me. Don't send Eleanor with explanations. Don't try to negotiate or manipulate your way out of this. She grabbed her medical bag, the one thing in this gilded cage that had remained true. You wanted to test my character? Congratulations, you succeeded. I failed your test by doing the one thing you never expected. I actually fell in love with you. The door closed behind her with a quiet click that somehow hurt more than a slam would have. In the hallway, she heard him call her name, heard the desperation in his voice, but she kept walking. Because sometimes, the greatest betrayals aren't the lies we're told, but the truths we're never trusted with. Behind her, in their shattered home, Julian stood amidst the wreckage of his perfect plan. In trying to protect himself from deception, he had become something worse, someone who would manipulate true love into a social experiment. And as dawn began to paint Manhattan in shades of gold, two people who had found real love in the midst of an elaborate lie faced the hardest truth of all, that sometimes, the things we do to protect ourselves from pain end up causing the deepest wounds of all. Chapter 7. The storm Manhattan disappeared beneath sheets of relentless rain, the worst storm in decades, transforming the city into a gray wasteland of howling winds and crashing thunder. From the 87th floor of Nakamura Enterprises, Julian stood in a wheelchair, now watching lightning split the sky. Each flash illuminated a face he hadn't shaved in days. The office behind him lay in ruins. Shattered tablets displayed the morning's headlines: Nakamura marriage scandal, billionaire's wheelchair deception exposed. Nurse walks out on billion-dollar marriage. Wall Street questions Nakamura's stability as stocks plummet. But it was the smaller headlines, buried in local papers, that truly haunted him. Pediatric cancer patients miss their Dr. Angel. Mount Sinai's miracle worker returns to Brooklyn roots. Local nurse chooses ethics over empire. Eleanor found him there, still in yesterday's clothes. Silver hair wild, hands trembling worse than ever. The office looked like a war zone, papers scattered across Italian marble. A broken crystal decanter leaking aged scotch into imported carpet. And in the corner, the wheelchair lay overturned like a defeated enemy. The board is demanding an emergency meeting, Eleanor said, her usual composure strained. The stock has dropped 15%. Our medical research partners are threatening to pull out. Let them. His voice was rough from disuse. It's all meaningless now. Sir, she's at Mount Sinai, he interrupted, working double shifts in pediatric oncology, sleeping in the doctor's lounge. Haven't you wondered why the security feeds are still running? Eleanor moved to the wall of monitors, each showing different angles of the hospital. On one screen, Amara moved through her rounds, her white coat a beacon in sterile hallways. Even through grainy footage, her exhaustion was evident. You need to stop watching her, Eleanor said softly. I can't. Another lightning flash illuminated his haggard face. Do you know what she's doing? Taking extra shifts with terminal cases, the ones other doctors avoid because they're too painful, too hopeless. She sits with them, holds their hands, fights for them until the very end. His voice broke, like she fought for you. The words hit him like physical blows. He turned to the window, but his reflection betrayed him, showing not the powerful CEO but a broken man, destroyed by his own machinations. A soft whirring sound made them both turn. Lila sat in the doorway in a child-sized wheelchair, clutching her unicorn, her mother hovering anxiously behind her. I'm sorry, her mother stammered. She insisted on coming. She's been asking for both of them since, Mr. Nakamura. Lila's voice was small, but determined. Why are you standing? The simple question, delivered with childlike directness, shattered what remained of his corporate mask. He sank to his knees before her wheelchair, uncaring of his $1,000 suit on the scotch-stained carpet. "Because I lied, sweetheart," his voice broke. "I pretended to need a wheelchair when I didn't." Lila considered this, hugging her unicorn closer. "But your hands still shake, like when you helped me with my art project." "Yes." He held up his trembling hands. "That part is real. I'm sick, but not in the way I pretended to be." "Why did you pretend?" The question everyone had asked reporters, board members, shareholders, but from Lila's innocent lips, it demanded absolute truth. "Because I was scared," he whispered. "Like you get scared before treatments. But instead of being brave like you, I hid behind lies." Lila wheeled closer, her face serious. "When I'm scared, Doctor, Nakamura holds my hand and tells me the truth, even when the truth is super scary." She says brave people don't hide from scary things. They face them together. Lightning flashed again, and thunder shook the building's foundations. On the security monitors, Amara was reading to a young patient, her free hand holding a trembling mother's fingers. "I miss her," Lila continued. "She promised to be there for my next treatment, but she sent another doctor instead. The new doctor is nice, but she's not Amara." Julian finished softly. "Mom says when we hurt someone's feelings, we have to say sorry and make it right." Lila's wisdom, distilled to childhood simplicity, cut through months of corporate strategy and social manipulation. "Sometimes sorry isn't enough, sweetheart. Then you have to try harder." Lila's conviction was absolute. "When I felt like giving up on treatments, Dr. Nakamura never gave up on me, even when other doctors said it was too hard. She said sometimes the hardest things are the most important." Eleanor watched in amazement as tears began rolling down her employer's face, not the diplomatic tears of corporate funerals or the calculated shows of emotion for press conferences, but raw, painful sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and wounded. Lila reached out from her wheelchair and hugged him. "It's okay to be scared, Mr. Nakamura, but it's not okay to hide. Hiding makes the scary things grow bigger in the dark." Through his tears, Julian hugged her back, careful of the fourth port visible on her arm. "When did you get so wise, Miss Lila?" "Dr. Nakamura taught me. She says wisdom is just love plus time." Lila pulled back, fixing him with a serious look. "Do you love her?" The question, so simple, so direct, so unavoidable, hung in the rain-shadowed office. Eleanor held her breath, watching her employer face perhaps the most important interview of his life. "Yes," he whispered, voice raw with truth, "more than all the buildings and companies and money in the world." "Then you have to show her," Lila said firmly. "Not with presents, or parties, or fancy doctor machines, but with the scary truth. That's what she did for me when I was really sick. She never pretended it wasn't scary. She just held my hand and faced it with me." A nurse appeared in the doorway, apologizing for Lila's wandering. As they prepared to leave, Lila turned back one last time. "Mr. Nakamura, the scariest part of being sick wasn't the pain, it was being alone. Maybe Dr. Nakamura is alone and scared too. Maybe she needs someone to hold her hand and face the scary truth with her." After they left, Julian remained kneeling on the floor, tears drying on his face. Eleanor approached carefully. "Your hands," she said softly. "The tremors are getting worse." He looked down at his shaking hands, the physical manifestation of his real fears, his real vulnerability. "Call the medical team," he said finally. "Schedule the treatment." "Sir?" "Lila's right. It's time to stop hiding." He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. "But first, I need you to do something else. Something more important than any business deal we've ever handled. Anything. Find me everything we have on experimental treatments for neuroblastoma, every trial, every study, every possibility." Lila's latest scans showed progression, didn't they? Eleanor nodded, understanding dawning. "You want to save her?" "No." He moved to his desk, pressing the intercom. "I want to give Amara the tools to save her. Because that's what love really is, not grand gestures or elaborate tests, but supporting someone's mission to help others." As if in response, thunder shook the building again. But for the first time in 3 days, something shifted in Julian's eyes, a spark of the brilliant strategist he'd once been, but tempered now with something new, something real. The storm raged on, but somewhere behind the clouds, dawn was breaking, and with it came the realization that sometimes The greatest storms aren't the ones that rage outside, but the ones that force us to face the truth about ourselves. In the pediatric ward of Mount Sinai, Amara sat beside another young patient's bed, unaware that her world was about to shift again. But this time, the change wouldn't come from elaborate deceptions or careful plans. It would come from the simple, scary truth of a man finally brave enough to stand before her without pretense, without protection, without anything but his trembling hands and his open heart. Because sometimes, the hardest storms lead us to the most important truths if we're brave enough to face them without hiding. Chapter 8. Redemption. The private medical facility at Nakamura Enterprises was designed to feel more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. But for Amara, every gleaming surface only reflected her pain. She hadn't planned to return here, not after the revelation that shattered her world a week ago. But Lila's mother had called in tears. Her daughter was asking for both Dr. Nakamura and Mr. Nakamura before her newest experimental treatment. "You don't have to go up there," Eleanor said softly, meeting her in the lobby. "He's in treatment right now. The first session started an hour ago." Amara's medical instincts flared despite herself. "The neural regeneration therapy?" Eleanor nodded. He waited until Lila was settled in her new treatment program before starting his own. "He didn't want you to know," she hesitated, "but he's authorized full access to every experimental treatment in development, not just for Lila, but for all your pediatric patients." The board nearly had a collective stroke when they saw the budget allocation. Amara absorbed this information, her heart twisting. It was exactly the kind of gesture that made him so dangerous, using his power and resources not to impress her, but to support the cause she cared about most. The elevator ride to the pediatric floor was silent. When the doors opened, Amara heard Lila's voice floating down the hallway. "But you promised you'd both be here." Following the sound, Amara froze in the doorway. Julian was already there, not in his wheelchair, but in a treatment chair similar to Lila's, and the fourth line, delivering his own medicine. He looked pale, his silver hair damp with sweat, but he was fully focused on the child beside him. "See," he was saying, "we're treatment buddies now, both of us fighting to get better together." Lila's face lit up at this idea, then fell slightly. "But Dr. Nakamura, right here," Amara said softly, stepping into the room. The look Julian gave her stole her breath, hope and fear and longing, all mixed with the physical pain he was clearly fighting. But he didn't speak, didn't try to defend or explain. Instead, he turned back to Lila. "Remember what we talked about, sweetheart? About being brave enough to face the truth?" Lila nodded solemnly. "Even when it's scary." "Well, I'm trying to be brave now. No more hiding in wheelchairs. No more pretending I'm not scared." His hands trembled violently, and Amara's professional eye noted the progression of his symptoms. "The medicine hurts, but that's okay. Sometimes healing has to hurt first." Amara moved to check Lila's, the fourth, hyper-aware of Julian watching her. Up close, she could see the toll the past week had taken on him: weight loss, dark circles under his eyes, the tremors now affecting both hands. "Your numbers look good, Lila," she said, reviewing the charts. "The new treatment seems to be working." "Mr. Nakamura said it's magic medicine," Lila confided, "from his special research labs. But he said you're the real magic, because you never give up on helping people get better." Tears pricked at Amara's eyes. "Lila, sweetheart, could you close your eyes for a moment? Try to rest while the medicine works." Once Lila had drifted into a light sleep, Amara finally turned to Julian. "You should have told me you were starting treatment today. Would you have come?" The honest question hung between them. "As your doctor, yes. As your wife." She trailed off. "I'm not asking you to be either right now," he said quietly. "I just needed you to see." "See what?" "That you finally decided to accept treatment? That you're using my patient as a prop in your redemption story?" "No." He winced as a tremor hit. "To see that I'm finally facing my fears instead of hiding from them. All of them." Amara's professional training warred with her personal pain as she watched him struggle. Finally, she stepped forward, adjusting the fourth line with practiced ease. "Your flow rate is too high. That's why it burns." His hand caught hers as she worked, and the contact sent electricity through them both. "I miss you," he whispered. "Not the nurse, not the society wife, just you. The woman who reads medical journals at 3:00 a.m. and fights with insurance companies for her patients, and calls me out on my corporate doublespeak." She pulled her hand away. "You missed a version of me that was reacting to a lie." "No." His voice was stronger now. "I fell in love with the real you. The lie was mine, and I'm done hiding behind it." He gestured to his treatment setup. "This is me." Amara, scared of losing control, scared of being vulnerable, scared of needing someone. The wheelchair was just a physical manifestation of all the walls I've built. Amara's medical instincts kicked in as his body seized with another tremor, this one worse than before. Without thinking, she moved to support him. "Breathe through it," she instructed, one hand on his back. "The treatment triggers neurological responses before it starts healing them. That's why you've been avoiding it, isn't it? Not just the physical discomfort, but the loss of control." He nodded, leaning into her touch despite himself. "I built an empire on control, every variable managed, every outcome predicted. Then you came along with your unbridled compassion and your absolute integrity, and suddenly you weren't in control anymore," she finished softly. "I thought I was testing you," he admitted, "but you were the one revealing truths about me. Every time you stayed late researching my condition, every time you fought for a patient's care, every time you saw through my corporate armor to the scared man underneath." Lila stirred in her sleep, murmuring something about unicorns. They both turned to watch her, this brave child fighting battles no child should face. "She said something to me last week," Julian continued quietly, "that the scariest part of being sick wasn't the pain, it was being alone." His voice cracked slightly. "I've been alone for so long. Amara, surrounded by people, but alone. Until you." Amara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "You pushed me away with lies." "I know." He reached for her hand again, and this time she didn't pull away. "But I'm asking you to watch me learn to be honest, not just about the wheelchair, but about everything. My fears, my feelings, my need for you." A nurse appeared in the doorway, then tactfully retreated. They were alone, except for Lila's peaceful breathing. "I can't trust you," Amara whispered. "Not yet. I know that too." His thumb traced patterns on her palm. "So don't trust my words. Trust my actions. Watch me face this treatment I've been avoiding. Watch me support your patient care without using it to manipulate you. Watch me learn to stand on my own, literally and figuratively, before I dare to ask you to stand with me again." Another tremor hit, and she instinctively steadied him. For a moment, they were just a doctor and a patient, a healer and someone needing to be healed. "Your next treatment is Thursday," she said finally. 3:00 p.m. "Yes, I'll be here." She stepped back, reclaiming professional distance. "As your doctor, nothing more." The hope that flared in his eyes was quickly tempered with understanding. "Thank you, Amara." She moved to leave, then paused at the door. "Julian, the research funding for Lila's treatment, thank you." "It's not a manipulation," he said quickly. "It's not even really about you. She helped me see some hard truths. This is my way of thanking her." For the first time in a week, Amara felt the ghost of a smile touch her lips. "Maybe you are learning." As she walked away, Julian watched her go, his heart lighter despite the pain coursing through his body. Because for the first time since she'd discovered his deception, she'd called him by his first name instead of Mr. Nakamura. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even trust, but it was a crack in the wall between them, a small opening where truth might begin to grow. Lila stirred again, blinking awake. "Did Dr. Nakamura leave?" "Yes, sweetheart." He thought of all the promises he'd broken, all the trust he'd shattered with his elaborate deceptions. "But she's coming back." "Promise?" "I can't promise for her," he said honestly, "but I can promise to keep working to deserve her coming back." Lila seemed to accept this. "My mom says the best kind of love is the kind that makes you want to be better." "Your mom is very wise. So is Dr. Nakamura," Lila said sleepily. "She makes everyone want to be better." As the child drifted off again, Julian felt the medicine burning through his veins, fighting the damage his fear had allowed to progress. But for the first time, he welcomed the pain, because sometimes healing had to hurt first. And sometimes the hardest treatments weren't the ones that fixed your body, but the ones that forced you to rebuild your soul. Chapter 9. Truth and Healing. The Nakamura Enterprises library looked different in the rain. Amara stood in the doorway, memories washing over her late nights researching treatments. Quiet conversations over coffee. The gradual transition from business arrangement to something deeper. Now, 3 weeks into Julian's treatment, she found him there again, surrounded by papers but no longer pretending. He was standing by the windows, one hand braced against the glass for support, watching lightning split the Manhattan sky. The tremors were less violent now, though still visible. The treatment was working slowly but surely, just as Lila's was. "You should be resting," Amara said, announcing her presence. "The neural regeneration therapy takes a toll." Julian turned, and the vulnerability in his eyes caught her off guard. No corporate mask, no careful performance, just a man facing his demons. "I found something," he said quietly. "Something I need to show you." He led her to his desk, where a familiar leather journal lay open. Amara recognized it, her research notebook, the one she'd hurled at him the night she discovered his deception. But beside it lay another journal, older and worn. "I started this 5 years ago," he explained, touching the older journal, "when I first saw you at Mount Sinai." Amara's breath caught. "What?" "I was there for a board meeting, walking past pediatric oncology. I heard laughter, real laughter, in a place usually filled with fear. There was a little boy who'd just received terrible news. And you." His voice softened with the memory. "You were sitting on his bed, using hand puppets to explain his treatment. You made chemotherapy sound like a superhero mission." He opened the journal, revealing pages of notes, observations, newspaper clippings. "I watched you turn medicine into magic, fear into hope. I watched you fight insurance companies, work double shifts, spend your lunch breaks reading to patients. I watched you change lives while everyone else was chasing promotions." Amara's hands trembled as she turned the pages. "You were stalking me." "I was studying hope," he corrected gently. "In my world of corporate takeovers and profit margins, I'd forgotten it existed. Then I saw you, this brilliant, compassionate woman who believed in healing more than wealth, in people more than power. So you decided to test me? To see if I could be corrupted?" "No." He struggled visibly with the next words. "I decided to test myself, to see if I could be saved." The confession hung in the rain, muffled silence. Amara sank into a chair, trying to process this new revelation. "The tremors started 4 years ago," he continued. "The doctors said it was stress, neurological deterioration from years of pushing too hard, caring too little. They recommended treatment, but I was afraid not of the pain, but of appearing weak. In my world, weakness gets exploited. So you created a bigger weakness as camouflage," Amara realized. "The wheelchair gave me an excuse to approach you, to see if your compassion was real." "Yes, but more than that, to see if I could learn it. Learn how to care about something more than power and control." Lightning flashed again, illuminating his silver hair. "I watched you with your patients, how you were strong for them, but never pretended their pain didn't matter. How you faced the darkest moments with grace, but never denied the darkness existed. I thought if anyone could teach me how to be human again, it would be you. Why didn't you just tell me this?" "Because I didn't understand it myself." He moved closer, though still keeping a respectful distance. "I built this elaborate scheme to test your character, but really, I was hiding from my own. Every time you researched treatments, every time you showed genuine concern, every time you put others before yourself, you were holding up a mirror I wasn't ready to look into." Amara stood abruptly, pacing the room. "Do you know what this sounds like? More manipulation, more carefully crafted stories." "I know." He didn't try to stop her movement. "That's why I'm not asking you to believe my words. Look at the dates in the journal. Look at the hospital records. Look at the security footage from 5 years ago. Everything I'm saying can be verified." She paused at the window, watching rain trace patterns on the glass. "Why tell me now?" "Because of something Lila said during treatment yesterday. She asked why grown-ups make everything so complicated when the truth is usually simple." His voice cracked slightly. "The simple truth is that I fell in love with your soul long before I met you. I created this elaborate scheme because I didn't trust myself to deserve someone like you. And in trying to prove I was worthy of your true self, I became the very thing I feared, someone who would manipulate and deceive." Amara turned to face him, really looking at him for the first time in weeks. The proud CEO was gone, replaced by someone more real, more human. His hands shook, not from neurological tremors now, but from the effort of complete honesty. "The treatment is painful," she said suddenly. He blinked at the apparent non sequitur. "Yes, but you're doing it anyway." "Yes. Why now, after refusing for so long?" His answer was simple. "Because you taught me that real strength isn't in hiding from pain, but in facing it honestly. Every time you sat with a dying child, every time you delivered hard news to parents, every time you chose truth over comfortable lies, you showed me what real courage looks like." Amara moved to the desk, picking up her own research journal. I filled this with theories about your condition. Spent countless nights trying to understand how to help you. I know. I watched on the security cameras, hating myself more each time you showed genuine concern for a condition I was faking. But the tremors were real. Yes, and getting worse because you were too proud, too afraid to face treatment. He gestured to the journals. I documented everything, every lie, every truth, every moment I wanted to confess but couldn't find the courage. It's all there, not as justification, but as evidence of my own cowardice and of your incredible impact on my life. Rain drummed against the windows, filling the silence as Amara absorbed his words. Finally, she spoke. I need time. I know. And proof access to everything, the security footage, the medical records, all of it, already arranged. Eleanor has prepared complete access to all files, no restrictions. She picked up both journals. I'm taking these. Of course. At the door, she paused. Julian, yes? Your next treatment, what you said about facing pain, honestly? I meant it. Then face it with me, not as your wife, not as your doctor, but as someone who believes the truth, no matter how painful, is the first step to real healing. After she left, Julian remained in the library, watching rain wash the city clean. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with a message from Lila's mother. Her latest scans showed tumor reduction. Hope, it seemed, was contagious. And maybe, just maybe, truth was too. Chapter 10, The Choice. The press conference room at Nakamura Enterprises buzzed with anticipation. Reporters from every major network crowded the space, cameras ready, waiting for what promised to be the story of the year. Nakamura Enterprises heiress refuses billion-dollar payment. Eleanor stood at the podium, masterfully deflecting questions while protecting both Julian and Amara. But the real drama was unfolding 30 floors above, in the private executive suite, where Amara sat surrounded by lawyers, staring at the contract that had started everything. Miss S. Nakamura, one of the lawyers, began. Dr. Amara, she corrected quietly. She had resumed using her professional name after discovering Julian's deception. Dr. Amara, he amended. You understand that by refusing the contracted payment, you're walking away from $1 billion money that is legally yours. Amara looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline, remembering another day in this office when a man in a wheelchair had offered her what seemed like a simple business arrangement. How naive they both had been. The contract is void, she said firmly. It was entered into under false pretenses. Actually, another lawyer interjected. Mr. Nakamura's legal team has prepared documentation showing that his medical condition, the tremors, was genuine, even if the paralysis was not. The contract never specifically mentioned stop. Amara's voice cut through the legal jargon. This isn't about legal technicalities. This is about truth. The door opened, and Lila's mother entered, tears streaming down her face. Doctor, Amara, the treatment, Lila's latest scan, she's in remission. The lawyer's forgotten. Amara rushed to embrace the crying woman. Over her shoulder, she caught a glimpse of Julian in his office across the hall. He was standing at his window, one hand pressed against the glass, watching the scene unfold. Their eyes met briefly before he turned away, giving her privacy for this moment. Later, after the celebrating parents had left and the lawyers had retreated to redraft documents, Amara found herself alone in the conference room. The billion-dollar contract lay before her, its legal language now seeming absurdly inadequate to capture the complexity of what had happened between her and Julian. Eleanor entered quietly, carrying a stack of files. These just came from the research department, the results from the expanded pediatric oncology trials. Thanks to the funding increase, we've seen a 40% improvement in response rates. Amara flipped through the reports, her doctor's heart soaring at the numbers, lives saved, families spared the grief she saw too often in her ward. He didn't do it to manipulate you, Eleanor said softly. He signed off on the funding the day after you left, then checked himself into treatment. Said something about learning to face pain honestly. I know. Amara traced the contract signature line. I've seen the security footage, read his journals, verified everything. And I understand him better now, why he created the test, why he maintained the deception. She smiled sadly. We're not so different. Really, both of us dedicated to healing. Me with medicine, him with money, both of us afraid of being loved for the wrong reasons. Eleanor placed another file on the table, Julian's latest medical reports. The treatment was working, the tremors were reducing, but it was clearly painful, a fact he no longer tried to hide. He's scheduled for another treatment this afternoon, Eleanor mentioned. He doesn't take the anti-anxiety medication anymore, says he needs to feel everything. Understand the cost of hiding from truth for so long. Amara stood, moving to the window. Below, reporters clustered around the building's entrance, hungry for the story of the nurse who walked away from a billion-dollar payoff. If only they knew the real story. Call the press conference, she said suddenly. Eleanor looked up sharply. Are you sure? Yes, but not about the money, about the pediatric oncology program, about Lila's remission, about the real wealth that can't be measured in dollars. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. And the contract? Amara picked up a pen, drawing a firm line through the payment clause. Some things are worth more than money, truth, trust, the chance to heal not just bodies but souls. As Eleanor left to make arrangements, Amara glanced again at Julian's office. He was with his medical team now, preparing for another treatment session. No wheelchair, no pretense, no hiding from the pain of healing. The choice, when it came down to it, was simple. Walking into the press conference room, Amara faced the sea of cameras with the same grace she brought to her hospital rounds. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Amara Brenda, and I'm here to talk about something more valuable than $1 billion. I'm here to talk about hope. As she spoke about the expanded treatment programs, about Lila's recovery, about the power of facing truth no matter how difficult, she felt something shift in her heart. The anger and hurt didn't disappear, but they transformed into something else: understanding, compassion, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of forgiveness. Because sometimes, the richest choices aren't about what we gain, but what we're willing to let go of in order to find something true. Chapter 11, Love's True Value. Christmas Eve transformed Brooklyn into a wonderland of snow and lights. Amara's small apartment, a far cry from the luxury penthouse she'd left months ago, glowed warm against the gathering dusk. She'd just finished a grueling shift at the hospital, but her heart was light. Lila had gone home that morning, officially cancer-free, clutching her ever-present unicorn, and making everyone promise to come to her dance recital in the spring. The knock at her door was so soft, she almost missed it. When she opened it, the sight stole her breath. Julian stood there, snow dusting his silver hair, no wheelchair in sight. He looked different, thinner perhaps, but stronger, in a way that had nothing to do with physical health. In one trembling hand, he held a small wrapped package. In the other, a familiar leather journal. You walked here? She said, noting the snow on his coat. From the subway, his voice was soft, uncertain. The treatment's working. I can manage about 10 blocks now before the tremors get bad. You've never taken the subway in your life. A small smile touched his lips. I'm learning about a lot of things. She should have shut the door, should have maintained the careful distance she'd built since walking away from their marriage. Instead, she found herself stepping back, letting him in from the cold. Her apartment was modest but warm, filled with medical textbooks and children's novels, tools of her trade in healing both bodies and spirits. On her coffee table lay the latest research papers from Nakamura Enterprises' expanded pediatric oncology program. Lila's mother sent this, she said, picking up a framed photo. It showed Lila in a dance costume, beaming at the camera, her hospital bed a distant memory. I know. Julian touched the frame gently. She's scheduled to perform at Lincoln Center in the spring. I've reserved the entire theater for her first recital. Of course you have. But Amara's tone held no bitterness now, only fond exasperation. He set the wrapped package on her coffee table. I'm not here to win you back, he said quietly. I'm here because it's Christmas Eve, and I finally understand what you tried to teach me all along. And what's that? That real wealth isn't in what we can buy or control, it's in what we choose to give away. He gestured to the package. Open it. Inside was a stack of legal documents, property deeds, bank transfers, corporate restructuring papers. Amara's eyes widened as she read, You're transferring majority control of Nakamura Enterprises' medical division to an independent foundation? He nodded. With you as head of the board, no strings, no corporate interference, complete autonomy to pursue any treatment research you believe in. Her hands trembled as she read further. This is worth more than the $1 billion I originally offered. His smile was gentle. Yes, because this isn't a payment or a manipulation. It's me finally understanding what you valued all along, the power to heal, to help, to make real change. Why? Because you taught me that real love isn't about grand gestures or elaborate tests. It's about supporting what matters most to the person you love. He ran a hand through his snow-damp hair, a gesture of vulnerability she'd never seen in their married days. I watched you for years. Watched you fight for every patient, celebrate every victory, mourn every loss. This foundation, it's not an attempt to buy your forgiveness. It's me finally becoming the kind of man who deserves to love someone like you. Amara sank onto her sofa, documents scattered around her. Through her window, snow fell on Brooklyn, turning the world pristine and new. The tremors, she said finally. They're really improving. Yes, though the treatment still hurts. But you taught me that too, that healing has to hurt sometimes. And the subway? He laughed softly. Terrifying, but enlightening. Did you know there's a violinist at the Borough Hall station who plays Bach perfectly? She looked at him, then really looked. Gone was the corporate armor, the careful control, the practiced charm. In its place was something raw and real, a man who had walked through snow and pain and transformation to become authentic. Julian moved to kneel before her, though she could see the effort it cost him. I'm not asking you to come back, he said. I'm asking for something much harder. What? A chance to court you properly, no contracts, no pretenses. Just a man asking the woman he loves if she might consider having coffee with him someday. Maybe tell him about her patience. Maybe let him learn how to be the kind of person worthy of her trust. Amara felt tears spill down her cheeks. You run a billion-dollar empire. No, he corrected gently. I ran an empire. Now I'm learning to be human, thanks to you. He reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. Amara Brenda, I love you not for what you can give me or what you represent. I love your fierce heart, your unflinching honesty, your ability to see hope in the darkest places. And if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time you'll give me proving that I can be worthy of that love. Through her tears, she saw him reach into his pocket, withdrawing not a ring but a simple key. What's this? The key to my private office, where all the security monitors are, where I kept my surveillance files. I'm having it all dismantled tomorrow. No more watching from a distance. No more hiding behind screens and cameras. If you ever let me into your life again, it will be face to face, truth to truth. The snow fell harder outside, muffling the city sounds until the world seemed to hold its breath. In that quiet space, Amara looked at the man kneeling before her, this proud, powerful man who had walked through Brooklyn snow and surrendered an empire. All to become real. Coffee, she said finally. What? We could start with coffee tomorrow morning. I have early rounds, but his smile then was like sunrise breaking through clouds. I know a place near the hospital. The owner's daughter was one of your patients last year. She makes incredible cinnamon rolls. Of course he knew he had watched for so long, but now he was asking to walk beside her instead. Standing, Amara moved to her window, aware of him following her movement. Below, Brooklyn glittered with Christmas lights, each one a beacon of hope in the darkness. The foundation, she said. I'll need complete transparency, regular audits, a board of ethical advisors. Already arranged, Eleanor has the files. She turned to face him. And us? One day at a time, one truth at a time, however long it takes, to rebuild what my fears destroyed. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. I'm not the man you married under contract, Amara, but I'm trying to become someone better, someone real. As if to prove his point, a tremor seized his right hand, and instead of hiding it, he let her witness his vulnerability, his ongoing healing. Coffee, she repeated softly. Tomorrow morning, 8:00 a.m. I'll be there. He moved to leave, then paused at her door. Merry Christmas, Amara. After he left, she stood at her window for a long time, watching snow transform Brooklyn into something magical and new. On her coffee table, the foundation documents promised hope for countless future patients, and in her heart, something that had been frozen began to thaw. Because sometimes, love's true value isn't in grand gestures or billion-dollar contracts, but in the courage to become real, to face truth, to walk through snow and pain and transformation for the chance to begin again. Chapter 12. Double joy. 2 years later, the grand ballroom of Nakamura Enterprises had been transformed into something magical. Instead of corporate galas or shareholder meetings, Today it hosted a very different celebration. Children from the pediatric oncology ward danced and played, their laughter echoing off marble walls. Among them, Lila, now cancer-free, and a rising ballet star, taught other young patients her dance moves. But the real celebration centered around two bassinets nestled in a quiet corner, where newborn twins slept peacefully, unaware they were about to make history. Amara stood at the window, radiant in a flowing azure gown that complemented her glowing skin. Pregnancy and childbirth had only enhanced her natural beauty, adding a softness to her usually professional demeanor. Beside her, Julian had never looked more proud or more humbled. "Are you ready?" he asked softly, taking her hand. She squeezed his fingers, noting how the tremors had almost completely vanished. To change the world? Always. The doors opened, admitting the press, but this wasn't an ordinary press conference. Today marked the official launch of the Nakamura Brenda Foundation's most ambitious project, yet a revolutionary genetic treatment program that would be offered free to any child with cancer, anywhere in the world. And their twins, born just 2 weeks ago, were at the heart of it all. Eleanor stepped to the podium first. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming today. Dr. Amara Brenda Nakamura and Julian Nakamura will announce a medical breakthrough that begins a new chapter in pediatric cancer treatment. But first, they'd like to share a personal story." Amara took the podium, her doctor's confidence now mixed with a mother's pride. 2 years ago, I walked away from $1 billion because I believed some things were worth more than money. Today, I stand here to tell you what those things are. She gestured to the twins. Our children, Hope and Justice, were conceived through a revolutionary genetic procedure developed in our labs. But they're more than just our miracle babies. Their umbilical cord blood contains a unique genetic marker one that, when synthesized, produces the most effective cancer-fighting cells we've ever seen. Julian stepped forward, his hands steady on her back. "What my brilliant wife is trying to say is that our children are quite literally born healers. The genetic therapy we developed to help them be born has created something extraordinary, a sustainable, reproducible cure for most childhood cancers." The room erupted in questions, but Lila's voice cut through the chaos. "Like how I got better?" "Yes, sweetheart." Amara smiled. "Remember those special medicines we tried? They were the first version of what we perfected for the twins. And now, thanks to them, we can help children all over the world." Julian took over, his business acumen now devoted to healing rather than profit. The Nakamura Brenda Foundation is establishing treatment centers in every major city globally. Any child, regardless of financial status, will have access to this therapy. And it all began with a love story. He turned to Amara, his eyes shining. A story about a doctor who taught a businessman that true wealth lies in what we give, not what we keep. About a woman who walked away from a fortune to protect her principles, only to help create something worth far more. A story about truth, Amara added, and the courage to face it, no matter how difficult. The twins stirred in their bassinets. Hope, with her father's silver hair and her mother's dark skin, opened her eyes first. Justice, his complexion a perfect blend of both parents, followed moments later. They were living symbols of unity, of barriers broken, of love transcending all boundaries. Lila skipped over to peer at them. "They're like little angels," she declared, "here to help other kids like me." The press conference continued, but the real story was in the details. Few would ever know how Amara had discovered the genetic marker while researching Julian's tremors, how their own medical challenges had led to a breakthrough that would save countless lives, how love in its purest form had created not just a family, but a legacy of healing. Later that evening, after the press had gone, and the children had returned to their ward, now a place of hope, rather than fear, Amara and Julian stood in their penthouse nursery. The twins slept peacefully in their cribs, while Lila's latest recital program hung framed on the wall alongside their medical patents. "Did you ever imagine," Amara asked softly, "that your elaborate scheme to test my character would end up saving thousands of lives?" Julian wrapped his arms around her, his hands now steady and strong. "I imagined finding truth. Instead, I found something far more powerful, a partner who could help me transform truth into hope. Hope and justice," she smiled, looking at their sleeping children. "Rather ambitious names." "They're Nakamura Brendas," he chuckled. "Ambition is in their DNA, along with compassion, integrity, and apparently miracle-producing stem cells." Through the window, Manhattan glittered beneath a starlit sky. Somewhere in the city, the violinist still played Bach at Borough Hall Station. The children's ward at Mount Sinai now boasted the highest recovery rate in the world. And in a small Brooklyn dance studio, Lila rehearsed for her next performance. Her cancer, a distant memory. "What are you thinking?" Julian asked, noting his wife's contemplative smile. "That some lies lead to truth," she answered. "Some pain leads to healing. And sometimes, the greatest miracles come not from what we planned, but from what we were brave enough to let ourselves become." Hope stirred in her crib, reaching out to grasp her brother's tiny hand. Even in sleep, they were connected, these miracle babies, born of love and science, of truth and transformation. "You know," Amara mused, "we never did cash that $1 billion check." "No need," Julian smiled. "We found something worth far more. And what's that?" He gestured to their sleeping children, to the medical patents on the wall, to the city beyond where thousands of families would now find hope instead of heartbreak. "A love that heals," he said simply. "Not just us, but the world." And in that moment, as Manhattan's lights twinkled like earthbound stars, the story that began with a contract, a wheelchair, and a $1 billion test found its true ending, not in wealth or power or carefully crafted deceptions, but in the pure, transformative power of love to heal, to hope, and to generations to come. For in the end, the greatest truth was the simplest, that love, when real and brave and true, has the power to heal not just hearts, but the very fabric of the world itself.